Welcome to my channel, Crimson Inquiry.
I drew a sharp breath, but Holmes remained still, his gaze fixed, his face a study in grim triumph. "Behold, Watson, the house of eternity." Before I could reply, footsteps echoed down the passage. From the shadows emerged three men cloaked in dark garments, their faces obscured. At their head strode a figure I recognized at once, the same shadow that had watched us near Temple, now revealed in the lantern's glow. "You have meddled far enough, Mr. Holmes," the leader hissed. "The mask is ours, as it has always been. You will leave, or you will not leave at all." Holmes straightened, his revolver gleaming in the lamplight. "Your rhetoric is wasted, sir. Scotland Yard's men lie even now in wait above. You are caught as surely as a rat in a trap," the man sneered. "And yet you brought no constable into this chamber. Do you think to frighten us with empty threats?" Holmes's thin smile curved. "Not threats, my dear fellow, calculations. I knew you would follow us, just as I knew your society would not permit me to stand here unobserved. You mistake me if you suppose I intended to walk away with the mask. No, I desired only to draw you into the open. And now you have obligingly revealed yourselves." Even as he spoke, a whistle shrilled through the tunnel. Lanterns flared, and Lestrade, stout and triumphant, appeared with his men, pistols raised. The intruders staggered back, their resistance brief and hopeless. Within moments they were subdued, their cloaks torn aside to reveal faces both ordinary and forgettable, the sort of men one might pass in the street without a glance. Holmes stepped forward, his gaze never wavering from the mask. "Watson," he said quietly, "this relic has drawn greed, deceit, and murder into its orbit. Yet it is but a mask, a piece of artifice shaped by human hands. The true danger lay not in any curse, but in the folly of men who believed they might wield its power." I could not deny the weight of his words, as the constables bore the prisoners away and Lestrade secured the chamber. Holmes oversaw the careful lifting of the mask, which was borne reverently to the surface, to be restored to the museum from which it had been taken. Later, as dawn broke over the Thames, I found Holmes standing upon the embankment, his gaze cast eastward over the sluggish river. The first pale light touched his features, and though fatigue lined his face, there was also a quiet satisfaction. "You see, Watson," he said, "the mind is its own Egypt, a land of riddles, buried chambers and forgotten truths. Those who dig without understanding find only dust and shadows. But with method, patience, and reason, even the darkest crypt may yield its secret." He turned then, slipping his arm through mine as we walked back toward Baker Street. "Come, my dear fellow. The Pharaoh's mask will rest once more in its case, and London may sleep easier for a time, but somewhere I suspect another puzzle already stirs. The game, as always, is but momentarily ended, and so the matter of the Pharaoh's mask was concluded, its mystery unraveled by Holmes's inexhaustible logic. Yet even as I set down these words, I cannot forget the strange glimmer in that golden face, nor the sense that ancient eyes had watched us from across the centuries. For myself, I was grateful enough to return to the quiet of Baker Street, while for Holmes, I knew only that he awaited the next summons, the next enigma, the next chance to pit his mind against the world's most inscrutable puzzles. "Watson," he said, "I believe the man has unwittingly revealed more than he intended. These records do not merely recount the reign of Menkara, they hint at the existence of a hidden chamber, one described as the House of Eternity, wherein lies the Pharaoh's mask in its original resting place. Markham sought to piece together the cipher with the aid of these texts. He has failed, but we shall not." At that moment heavy boots sounded upon the stair, and Inspector Lestrade, flushed and triumphant, entered with two constables at his heels. Markham rose, his wrists promptly seized. His parting words to Holmes were uttered in a voice that seemed to echo with menace. "You play with forces you cannot comprehend. The mask will not rest until it has claimed its price." Holmes watched impassively as he was led away, then turned once more to the papers upon the table. He gathered them carefully, his eyes shining with that peculiar fire which I knew betokened the nearness of some great revelation. "Watson," he murmured, "the real chase begins now." Markham was but an instrument, a bold, reckless instrument, but still a tool. Behind him lies the hand that guided all this, the true author of the theft and the cipher alike. And it is that hand, my dear fellow, which we must now unmask. Thus we departed the chamber. the stolen manuscript safe in Holmes's possession, but with the certain knowledge that the shadow which had haunted us since the night of the theft had only grown darker, and that London itself might soon bear witness to mysteries more perilous than any we had yet encountered. The chill of Markham's final words lingered with us long after. He had been marched away under Lestrade's watch. As we returned to Baker Street, the fog had thickened across London, wrapping the lamps in a sallow glow, and I could not shake the uneasy conviction that the business was far from concluded. Holmes sat silent beside me in the cab, the bundle of recovered manuscripts clutched close beneath his arm, his keen eyes fixed upon some vision that only he could perceive. Once within the warmth of our sitting room, Holmes spread the papers across the table with the reverence of a priest laying out sacred relics. His long fingers danced lightly over the brittle pages, his gaze absorbing every line of faded ink, every peculiar turn of phrase. He moved with such intensity that I hesitated even to pour the tea for fear of disturbing his concentration. At last he leaned back, steepling his hands before him. "Watson," he said, "Markham was truthful in one respect, though likely unwittingly so. These translations are not the idle ramblings of an ambitious thief. They are the fragments of a map, no mere metaphor but a genuine record, pointing towards something concealed. Consider this passage here." He pushed one of the sheets toward me, his finger resting beneath a line of cramped hieroglyphs rendered in careful hand. "The house of eternity beneath the river's breath, where stone guardians watch the eternal night. Do you perceive it?" I shook my head, the words to me little more than poetry. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "It is a cipher. The river's breath, the Thames, naturally. Stone guardians, obelisks perhaps, or statues known to every Londoner who cares to look. And eternal night. A vault concealed where no sunlight ever penetrates. My dear fellow, what is described here is a hiding place not in distant Egypt, but here beneath the very streets of London." The notion struck me with force. "Surely, Holmes, you cannot suggest that an Egyptian relic of such antiquity lies buried beneath our own capital?" "I suggest nothing," he replied coolly. "I merely follow where the evidence leads, and the evidence is beginning to speak with some clarity. Consider, Watson. The mask was removed from its resting place centuries ago, perhaps smuggled through channels known only to a secretive order of collectors. To safeguard it, they concealed it within this city, waiting until such time as it might be retrieved. Markham stumbled upon their trail, but lacked the intellect to complete the puzzle. We must succeed where he has failed." The fire crackled in the grate, casting shifting shadows across Holmes's sharp features. I could see the fever of the chase upon him, that restless brilliance which would drive him sleepless if need be, until every last thread was woven into its place. "Yet we must tread carefully," he continued, his voice low. "Markham spoke of others, men whose reach extends beyond him. If indeed some secret society guards the mask, they will not sit idly by while we approach their prize. Watson, you must steel yourself, for the danger will grow keener with each step." I assured him of my readiness, though inwardly my heart quickened at the prospect. The next 2 days were spent in a flurry of research. Holmes dispatched telegrams to antiquarian colleagues, consulted obscure volumes at the British Museum, and even paid a discreet visit to the embalmer's vaults at St. Clement's Lane, where he lingered long over records of excavations brought into England during the last century. I accompanied him whenever possible, though often my task was but to observe as he delved into some dusty ledger or muttered calculations beneath his breath. One evening, as we returned home with the gaslights flaring against the damp mist, Holmes drew from his coat a slip of paper covered with his neat hand. "Here, Watson, is the key." 3 points of reference emerge from the texts: the Egyptian obelisk upon the embankment, Cleopatra's Needle, the ancient crypts beneath Temple Church, and a forgotten water-gate beneath the arches at Blackfriars. Joined together, they form a triangle, and within that triangle lies our quarry. It is there, beneath the river's breath, that the house of eternity must lie. His eyes blazed with conviction, and I felt a thrill of awe as I studied the simple triangle upon the page. "And you propose we search these vaults?" I asked. "Not search, Watson, investigate with precision. We must move swiftly, for our adversaries may already suspect that the trail has been uncovered. They will not hesitate to silence those who come too close." That very night we set out toward Temple, the fog pressing low, and the air heavy with the chill of impending rain. The great round church loomed solemnly, its ancient stones whispering of centuries past. Holmes produced a lantern from beneath his cloak, and with the aid of a sympathetic verger, we descended into the crypt. The air grew dank, the walls rough-hewn and lined with decaying effigies of knights, long turned to dust. Holmes moved methodically, sweeping the beam across carvings and inscriptions. At last he paused before a weathered block etched with faint symbols. "Watson, do you see?" The same cartouche repeated from the manuscript. This is no coincidence. The guardians of the mask marked their path with signs recognizable only to those initiated in their lore. This vault forms one corner of the triangle. We pressed onward, though nothing more yielded itself to our scrutiny that night. Yet as we emerged once more into the open air, I caught sight of a shadow slipping back into the mist, a man watching us, then vanishing with feline swiftness. Holmes's eyes met mine, grim and knowing. "They are aware, Watson. The contest is joined." We returned to Baker Street under that oppressive sense of being followed, though no further sign betrayed our pursuer. Once safe within our lodgings, Holmes set the manuscripts aside and fixed me with a rare moment of solemnity. "This is no ordinary case, my dear fellow. It is not theft alone, nor even murder that may follow. We contend against a design centuries in the making, guarded by men whose zeal may equal that of the most fanatical sects. One misstep, and the Pharaoh's curse, so to speak, may fall not upon us alone, but upon all who cross their path." His words sank deep into me, yet I could not withhold my admiration for his composure in the face of so vast and terrible a mystery. And as the wind moaned outside our windows and the fire burned low, I knew that we stood but upon the threshold of revelations that might shake the very heart of London. The night was raw and sodden with mist when Holmes and I made our way to the embankment. The Thames churned darkly below, its current flecked with the reflections of wavering gaslight. Cleopatra's Needle loomed above us, the ancient stone rising stark against the shrouded sky. Holmes's steps were purposeful, each tap of his cane upon the pavement a note of determination. He halted at the monument's base, his lantern casting a thin circle of light over the weathered hieroglyphs. "Here, Watson," he murmured, pressing his fingers against a nearly invisible seam at the pedestal's edge. The inscription from the manuscripts pointed to this place. "The guardian gazes westward. The gate lies at its feet. You see? This recess is no accident." With deft movements he pressed upon the stone until a section shifted with a muted grind. A narrow aperture revealed itself, concealed for centuries beneath London's very gaze. Holmes produced a small crowbar and worked it until the gap widened enough to admit a man. We descended cautiously into a hidden passage, the damp air reeking of age and stagnant water. The tunnel sloped toward the river, its walls inscribed with faded carvings echoing those I had glimpsed in the manuscripts. Holmes's lantern flickered across rows of figures, priests, falcons, and finally the jackal-headed Anubis, sentinel of the dead. At the tunnel's end lay a vaulted chamber. There, upon a stone dais, rested a casket of black basalt, its surface inlaid with golden symbols that shimmered in the dim light. And atop the casket, as if enthroned, was the object of our long pursuit, the Pharaoh's mask. Its gilded visage gleamed coldly, the eyes staring out with a majesty at once regal and menacing. His eyes glittered as he bent over the case, the thief's hand trembling as it reached for the prize he had long pursued. Holmes crouched beside me, whispered, "Now, Watson, observe well, for this is the climax of our hunt." Markham's fingers hovered an instant above the glass before he produced a slender tool and slid it into the lock with a practiced movement. The mechanism yielded as though to an old acquaintance. He lifted the lid noiselessly and drew forth the gleaming mask, his breath catching audibly in his throat. For a moment, he gazed upon it with a reverence that bordered on rapture, then wrapped it quickly in a cloth and concealed it beneath his coat. Holmes moved like a shadow, gliding from our concealment until he stood but a yard from the man. "Your devotion does you credit, Mr. Markham," he said softly. "But alas, your prize is naught but painted plaster." Markham started violently, the colour draining from his face. In that instant of shock, Holmes sprang forward and seized his wrist with iron grip. I leapt from my place to bar the way, but Markham, quick as a cornered animal, twisted free with astonishing agility and dashed toward the corridor. Holmes was after him in a flash, his coat-tails streaming while I pounded close behind. The chase carried us through gallery after gallery, our footsteps echoing like pistol shots in the silence. Markham darted between cases, overturning a pedestal in his flight, the crash reverberating as we pursued. Twice he glanced back, his face a mask of desperation, before plunging into a side passage that led toward the great staircase. There, by some diabolical foresight, he had left a door unlatched. He flung it open and disappeared into the outer court. By the time we gained the door, the night fog had swallowed him. The courtyard lay empty, save for the fading echo of his boots upon the pavement. Holmes halted, every muscle taut, his eyes raking the mist with furious concentration. Then slowly he straightened, his expression hard as steel. "He has slipped the noose once more," he said in a voice low but firm. "Yet he cannot go far. He believes himself victorious, but in truth he has betrayed his desperation. That plaster mask in his coat will tell him soon enough that he has been deceived, and then he must act openly, for his schemes allow no retreat. It is only a matter of where and when." We returned to Baker Street as the first pale light of dawn crept over the city. Holmes threw himself into his chair and sat with his chin upon his hands, eyes fixed upon the fire. For near an hour he spoke not a word, and I dared not interrupt his reverie. At last he stirred. "There is one move left to him, Watson," he said. The cipher pointed to a chamber, the resting place of the Nile Queen. He believes the key to its location lies with the mask, yet deprived of the true relic, he must seek another path. I wager he will strike again, not at the museum, but at some private collection or archive that holds records of Menkaura's reign. The question is which and how soon. Before I could respond, a rap came upon the door, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in a breathless messenger boy. He bore a note addressed in a trembling hand to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Holmes tore it open, and as he read his features sharpened into the keen lines of triumph. He handed it to me without a word. The note was from Sir Edmund Fairfax. It stated that a disturbance had been discovered at the museum's private archives. Drawers rifled, papers strewn, and among them missing a set of translations relating to the reign of Menkaura. The theft had occurred scarcely an hour after our pursuit of Markham. Holmes rose with sudden energy, his eyes blazing. "As I foretold, the man wastes no time. Watson, there is no rest for us. He will seek to decode those records before the day is out, and if we can but trace his hiding place, the game is ours. Come, we must consult the map of London's antiquarian haunts. There is a lair, a bolt hole, where he feels secure enough to pore over his stolen prize, and by heaven, we shall find it before another night has passed." Thus began the most relentless pursuit I had yet witnessed, one in which every alley of Bloomsbury, every obscure bookshop and lodging-house, might conceal the man whose hand had woven so dark a web around the Pharaoh's mask. I saw in Holmes the full measure of his resolve, his mind burning with deduction, every clue seized and fitted into its place with unerring precision. As though the fog of London seemed to thicken about us, I knew the chase was nearing its climax, and that soon the hidden hand behind theft, cipher, and superstition would be forced into the open. Holmes bent over the unfolded map of London, spread across our sitting-room table, his long, slender finger tracing the districts where antiquarian dealers, obscure collectors, and foreign scholars were most likely to be found. His eyes flicked across the paper with the same intensity with which another man might read a confession. "Observe, Watson," he said, tapping the district of Bloomsbury. "Here lies the intellectual heart of London's Egyptological pursuits. Montague Street, Gower Street, Russell Square. Every reputable antiquary has his rooms in this quarter, and among them are several less reputable ones who keep their shutters closed when the police pass by. Our quarry will not waste time. He will require privacy, access to reference works, and perhaps allies who would not scruple to turn a blind eye so long as coin crossed the palm. Let us begin here." We set out at once, the day still young, though the weight of the previous night's exertions pressed upon me. Holmes, however, appeared tireless, his every sense heightened by the thrill of pursuit. The cab carried us swiftly through the crowded streets, until we alighted near the museum once more. But instead of turning toward its familiar colonnade, we threaded into narrower lanes where the air seemed thick with dust and secrets. Our first call was upon Mr. Julius Meeks, a parchment dealer known to Holmes through prior inquiries. A wizened fellow with ink-stained fingers, he bowed low at sight of my companion. Holmes wasted no pleasantries. Mr. Meeks, a gentleman may have come to you within the last hours, seeking manuscripts touching upon Menkora, Pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. Tall, of commanding presence, a scar upon his cheek. Did you observe such a visitor? The dealer blinked, shook his head, and replied that his trade had been undisturbed save for a German student who had come to ask after Coptic grammars. Holmes studied him keenly, then gave a curt nod and withdrew, his stride unbroken as he moved to the next address. Thus the morning passed in a succession of inquiries, each negative, each leaving Holmes as imperturbable as before. At noon, as the bells tolled, we emerged from a shop in Store Street where the proprietor had professed ignorance, and I ventured a word. "Holmes, are we not chasing shadows? This city holds millions. One man could vanish for weeks." He stopped short, his gaze fixed upon the opposite pavement. "Not shadows, Watson. Look there." Following his gesture, I saw a figure slip quickly into a narrow alley between 2 shuttered shops. Though the fog of the morning sun blurred the distance, I caught the unmistakable gleam of that scarred cheek. Holmes was already in pursuit, darting across the street with a swiftness that left me scarcely time to follow. We plunged into the alley, its damp walls pressing close about us, the air heavy with mildew. At its end rose a low door, half concealed beneath a sagging archway. It had just swung shut. Holmes flung it open without hesitation, and we found ourselves in a cramped stairwell leading upward. The sound of hurried steps echoed above. With a glance of determination, Holmes mounted the stairs and I kept close at his heels. We emerged into a dim chamber littered with scrolls, crates, and books, their titles scrawled in many tongues. At a table beneath a single lamp sat Markham, the stolen translations spread before him. He looked up, his face pale yet defiant, and his hand moved toward the drawer at his side. "Do not reach, sir," Holmes commanded, his revolver leveled with steady hand. "We are 2-1, and your game is ended." For a long moment Markham's chest heaved, his eyes darting like those of a trapped beast. Then, with a slow and bitter smile, he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You are clever, Mr. Holmes," he said hoarsely. "Clever enough to follow my trail, but not clever enough to understand it. These papers," he struck them with his hand, "hold the key to wealth and power beyond your imagining. Do you think I stole them for myself alone? No, there are others, men whose reach extends far beyond London. You have crossed their path and you will live to regret it." His words carried a chill that seemed to settle upon the dusty chamber. Holmes, however, betrayed no sign of unease. "I fancy it is you who will regret, Mr. Markham," he returned evenly, "for the police are even now upon their way. The museum will reclaim its property, and as for your mysterious patrons, I shall take steps to acquaint myself with them soon enough." Markham's eyes narrowed, his smile hardening into a sneer. "You think you have won, but the mask itself is not yours. You hold only fragments. The true treasure lies hidden where neither your Scotland Yard nor your intellect can reach." Holmes regarded him in silence for a heartbeat, then turned to me. "Watson, guard him a moment." He stooped over the scattered papers, his keen gaze darting across the lines of translation. His lips moved soundlessly, as though rehearsing a chain of thought. At length he straightened, his expression one of dawning comprehension. A man of talent, if one may call criminal ingenuity by that name, and ruthless in pursuit of gain. It is as I suspected, Watson. These men were no more than the hand that strikes. The brain is Markham's, and if I am not mistaken, his purpose is not yet fulfilled. Lestrade puffed out his chest. "All very well, Mr. Holmes, but what would you have us do? We have 3 in custody, and evidence enough for the courts. As for this Markham, if he has vanished, we cannot conjure him forth." Holmes's reply was cold and deliberate. "You will do precisely as you please, Lestrade. For my part, I intend to bring Markham into the open, and to do so I must follow a trail which he himself has taken pains to obscure. You may regard the case as concluded. I do not." When Lestrade had departed, Holmes turned at once to me. "I must ask you, Watson, to accompany me to Bloomsbury. If I read the signs aright, Markham has not fled London but concealed himself within it, relying upon the fog and the crowd to shield him. There is one quarter where his presence may yet be traced. We set out within the hour, the damp streets crowded with costermongers and hawkers, the wheels of hansom cabs sending up showers from the puddles. Bloomsbury, with its warren of bookshops and dealers in the arcane, offered the perfect cover for a man of Markham's profession. Holmes guided me with unerring precision to a narrow street whose shop fronts displayed dusty curiosities, yellowed manuscripts and Egyptian statuettes of questionable authenticity. At one such establishment, he paused, his gaze sweeping over the door and windows with hawk-like intensity. The shutters were drawn, yet faint traces upon the sill betrayed that they had been handled recently. Holmes stooped, picked a fragment of papyrus fiber from the step, and slipped it into his pocket. "He has been here," he murmured, "and not long since. We gained admittance by means of a side entrance, which Holmes discovered to be imperfectly secured. Within, the shop was dim and close, the air thick with the scent of dust and stale tobacco. Cases of antiquities lined the walls, many of them plainly counterfeit to my unpracticed eye. Holmes moved among them swiftly, pausing now and again to lift a lid or open a drawer. At last he halted before a large wooden crate, the lid half-nailed, a shipping label affixed. He drew out his knife and prized the top open, revealing a collection of stone fragments, all of them inscribed with hieroglyphics. "Contraband," he said, his voice low but fierce. "Markham has been trafficking relics out of Egypt under false pretenses. And yet this—" He reached deeper, drawing forth a scrap of parchment upon which had been scrawled a set of figures and words in hurried hand. He read it once, then folded it carefully. "This is the key, Watson. The mask was not their sole objective. It is a cipher, a clue pointing to something greater still." Even as he spoke, a sound reached us, the creak of a board above, followed by the faintest scuff of a boot. Holmes's hand went instantly to his revolver. He motioned me to silence, and together we stole toward the stair. A shadow flickered on the landing, then withdrew. Without hesitation, Holmes sprang upward, and I followed at his heels. But when we reached the room above, it was empty save for an open window swaying in the draught. Holmes leaned out, scanning the alley below, where only the swirl of fog remained. "He was here," Holmes said grimly, slipping his revolver back into his pocket. "Markham himself watching, listening. He has slipped through our fingers this time, but the net tightens. He knows now that I pursue him, and that knowledge will drive him to his next move. We must be ready, Watson, for the true struggle is only beginning." His words chilled me, for I saw in his face that rarest of expressions, something akin to anticipation tinged with danger. And in that instant, I realized that the theft of the Pharaoh's mask was but the opening gambit, in a game whose stakes reached far beyond a single relic, into realms of intrigue that even I had yet to fathom. Holmes folded the scrap of parchment and tucked it into his breast pocket with the utmost care, as though it were as valuable as the relics themselves. His eyes had taken on that sharp brightness I had come to recognize as the herald of discovery, and though the foggy alley beyond the open window held no sign of Markham, I could sense that Holmes had already seized upon some invisible thread that bound the man's flight to a greater design. We quitted the premises swiftly, Holmes pausing only to secure the crate and affix his card upon it for Lestrade's benefit. "The Yard will find this trove of contraband instructive," he remarked. "But let them gloat at their leisure. Our quarry has played his hand, Watson, and in so doing has betrayed the shape of his ambition. He will not risk capture while his purpose remains incomplete, and therein lies our opportunity." As we made our way back through the narrow streets of Bloomsbury, I pressed him to share his deductions. He shook his head with a half-smile. "Patience, my dear fellow. A cipher is like a lock. It must be turned with the proper key. This note will yield its secret, but not here in the open street. Once we are at Baker Street, with my books of reference and a quiet fire, we shall see what Mr. Markham sought to conceal." The journey back seemed interminable to me, so eager was I to learn the contents of that parchment. At last we reached our rooms, where Holmes flung aside his disguise and, seating himself at his desk, spread the scrap before him. I observed it closely. A jumble of figures, some crossed and corrected, with curious symbols inserted between. To my eye it was a meaningless scrawl, yet Holmes studied it with an intensity that excluded all else. He fetched down from the shelf a volume on Egyptian hieroglyphics, then another on cryptographic methods, cross-referencing one with the other until his brow cleared. "Observe, Watson," he said, jabbing the page with his pencil. "The symbols are not hieroglyphs in the true sense, but a clumsy imitation, intended to mask their true purpose. Beneath this disguise lies a simple substitution cipher. The figures correspond to positions in an ancient funerary text, while the symbols indicate the words to be extracted. "And here, see how they align, it spells out a phrase," he wrote swiftly. And as the letters took shape upon the page, I felt a chill course through me. "Chamber beneath the Nile Queen." Holmes sat back, his eyes alight with triumph. Markham has not risked so much for the mask alone. That object, valuable though it is, was but the bait. His true aim is knowledge of this chamber, which, if it exists, may contain treasures beyond reckoning. Somewhere within the lore of Menkara lies a clue to its location, and the mask, I fancy, is the key. "But how can such a chamber concern us here in London?" I asked. "Because, Watson, knowledge is as precious as gold. If Markham has learned even a fragment of the secret, he can sell it to the highest bidder, whether in Cairo, Constantinople, or New York. Imagine the wealth that might be staked upon the recovery of such a tomb. The thefts, the murders, the midnight conspiracies, all are but the ripples of that hidden prize." He rose suddenly, pacing the room with restless energy. "Markham will not leave England yet. He lacks the full cipher, else he would already be gone. He will try again for the mask, or for the documents which the museum may still hold. Our task is to anticipate that move and meet him at the very moment of his desperation." It was past midnight before Holmes allowed himself to rest, and even then I could tell that sleep was far from his mind. I, for my part, lay long awake, haunted by visions of ancient crypts and shadowy figures slipping through the fog-bound streets of London. The following day brought confirmation of Holmes's foresight. A messenger arrived from the museum bearing a letter addressed to Sir Edmund Fairfax. It had been delivered by hand without signature, and bore only the words, "Return the mask to the darkness, or more will fall beneath the curse." The staff, already unnerved by their fellow's untimely death, were in near panic. Sir Edmund, white with anxiety, begged Holmes to intervene. "Superstition is a dangerous ally," Holmes told him gravely. "Markham employs it to unman your attendants, to cloud the judgment of honest men. But I assure you, Sir Edmund, the curse is naught but a cloak for human cunning. Strengthen your guards, and I shall see to the rest." That evening Holmes devised a bold course. "If Markham covets the mask still," he said, "we shall let him believe it lies once more within his grasp. But the object in the case will not be the genuine article. I have here a replica, sufficient to deceive in dim light. The true mask will remain in my keeping, where no thief's hand may reach it. Let us see how far Markham's desperation will drive him when he lays hands upon a worthless copy." I marveled at the audacity of the scheme, yet I could not deny its logic. By setting such a snare, Holmes meant to force Markham into open action, stripping away the shadows in which he moved. All that remained was to wait, and so once more we found ourselves within the echoing halls of the museum after dark, the galleries hushed save for the ticking of the great clock. The false mask gleamed from its case, mute and ominous, while Holmes and I concealed ourselves in the gloom beyond. The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness, until at length there came the faint sound of a door eased open and footsteps padding across the stone. A lone figure approached the case, swift, assured, and solitary. In the wavering lamplight, I caught the sharp outline of his features. It was agreed, and knew without question that we beheld Julius Markham at last. Holmes assured him that the utmost care would be taken, and at last the weary trustee departed, leaving us alone with the sinister gleam of the ancient mask. For some time Holmes sat silent, his fingers steepled, his gaze fixed upon the relic, as though it might yield its secrets to the sheer force of his scrutiny. Then he spoke softly, yet with a conviction that stirred my very blood. "Watson, the game grows deeper. We have unmasked the hand but not the brain. Before long we shall confront the true master of this conspiracy, and then perhaps the full design shall be revealed. Until then we must watch and wait." I could not suppress a shudder, for in that moment the mask seemed no longer a mere object of gold and lapis, but a symbol of the shadow that stretched from the tombs of kings across the centuries to the very heart of London. And I knew that, though Holmes sat calm and resolute, the days ahead promised peril such as even we had seldom faced. The following day dawned grey and damp, the drizzle of a London morning cloaking the city, in a pall that seemed almost fitting for the grim business before us. Holmes was already astir when I descended, his breakfast untouched, his pipe lying cold upon the mantel. He stood before the window, his long frame silhouetted against the misted glass, and though he greeted me briefly, I saw at once that his thoughts were deeply engaged elsewhere. Upon the table lay a sheet of notepaper, covered in his neat, precise hand, a draft of some communication, while beside it rested the small box that contained the Pharaoh's mask, now sealed once more under lock. "You will forgive my abstraction, Watson," he said at last, turning. "I have been considering how best to bait the trap. Lestrade has consented to my plan, though with his usual reluctance, and Sir Edmund, after much persuasion, has yielded also. By this evening, the newspapers shall contain a discreet notice that the mask has been restored to its case, and tomorrow the galleries will be open again to the public. Our adversaries will not be able to resist another attempt. You propose, then, to wait for them within the museum?" I asked. "Precisely. Yet it is not a passive wait. These men are cunning, resourceful, and utterly devoted to their cause. We must therefore conceal our vigilance in such fashion that even the keenest eye will suspect nothing. For that reason, I have secured from the curator leave to disguise myself as a night attendant, while you, Watson, shall pose as a fellow guard. Lestrade will station men at the entrances, but discreetly. If the conspirators strike, it will be in the hours of silence when the corridors echo only to their own footfalls. That is when we shall meet them." Though I had long since accustomed myself to the hazards into which Holmes's methods drew me, I confess a thrill of apprehension ran through me at this scheme. The vast halls of the museum at night, shrouded in dim light and filled with the mute company of ancient statues and mummies, seemed the very stage for some sinister drama. Yet I uttered no objection, for I trusted implicitly in Holmes's judgment. That evening, as dusk gathered, we set forth. Holmes had attired himself in a rough uniform of a watchman, his features altered by a smear of soot and the droop of his eyelids, so that even I, who knew his every line and gesture, scarcely recognized him. I likewise donned a plain garb and carried a truncheon at his suggestion. We entered the museum by a side door, admitted by a grateful curator, and there began our long vigil. The hours crept by with leaden pace. From our post near the Egyptian wing, we saw the last of the staff depart and the great doors locked behind them. Silence descended, broken only by the distant drip of rainwater and the faint creak of settling timbers. Lamps had been left burning in certain galleries, their glow casting long shadows that made the carved figures upon the walls seem almost alive. There in the center of the chamber, the Pharaoh's mask gleamed once more from its glass case, an object of such beauty and menace that I could well understand how superstition might weave around it the dark web of a curse. Holmes stood motionless beside a column, his sharp eyes never straying from the case. From time to time he bent to whisper a word of instruction, cautioning me to stillness, or directing my attention to some faint sound. More than once I thought I heard the muffled echo of a step in the corridor, but each time it proved no more than the shifting of the old building. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, and still nothing stirred. It was not until the clock struck 2 that Holmes touched my arm. I followed the line of his gaze and saw at the far end of the gallery the faint gleam of a lantern, swiftly extinguished. A shadow flitted across the stone floor, then another. My heart leapt into my throat as 3 figures emerged from the darkness, muffled in black and moving with the surety of men well acquainted with their ground. They approached the case with scarcely a pause, one producing from his cloak a set of tools which glinted dully in the lamplight. Holmes pressed a finger to his lips, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. We watched in utter silence as the leader bent to his task. Within moments he had sprung the lock with professional ease, and the glass lid rose noiselessly. Another reached forth gloved hands to seize the mask. That instant Holmes was upon them. With a bound he had seized the leader's wrist, twisting it so that the tool clattered to the floor. I rushed to his aid, striking at the second man, who staggered back with a cry. The third darted for the corridor, but even as he fled, Lestrade and his constables, alerted by our prearranged signal, closed in from both sides. The struggle was fierce but brief, for surprise was on our side. In a matter of moments, the intruders were overpowered and bound. Holmes straightened, his breath quick but his manner as composed as though he had merely concluded a chess problem. He stooped to examine the leader, a man of middle years, his dark eyes gleaming with hatred and defiance. "As I surmised," said Holmes quietly, "the hand may change, but the brain remains the same. This fellow is no mere thief. He is the lieutenant of a larger cause. We shall find, when we examine his correspondence, that he is linked with the prisoner already in custody." Lestrade, flushed with the glow of success, clapped his hands together. "A fine catch, Mr. Holmes. That makes 4 of them now. And with the evidence of the attempt upon the mask, we'll see them transported for life, if not worse." But Holmes shook his head gravely. "Do not deceive yourself, Lestrade. These are but the outer circle. Somewhere in London moves the true architect of this design, and until he is unmasked, neither the museum nor its treasures are safe. Tonight we have won a battle, but the war is yet to be decided." Even as he spoke, I felt the truth of his words, for though the conspirators lay trust before us, and the mask gleamed unscathed in its case, there lingered in the air the sense of something unfinished, a shadow yet unbanished. Holmes's eyes, piercing and far-seeing, were already turned beyond the walls of that ancient hall to the greater game that still awaited us in the labyrinth of London. The prisoners, once secured and conveyed under guard to Scotland Yard, left the Egyptian gallery in a state of uneasy quiet. Lestrade, flushed with triumph, took his leave, promising Holmes that he would press the Home Office for recognition of his efforts. Yet Holmes, who had scarcely spoken during the exchange, lingered a long while before the reopened case. His eyes, fixed not upon the mask itself, but upon the faint scratches left by the burglar's tools upon the glass, seemed to read in them some message invisible to any other observer. As we returned to Baker Street in the grey hush before dawn, I could not restrain myself from remarking upon his silence. "Surely, Holmes," I ventured, "you must be satisfied. The conspirators were caught red-handed. The relic is safe. What remains to trouble you?" He gave me a sidelong glance, his features drawn and severe in the half-light. "You have heard me speak before, Watson, of the distinction between effect and cause. Tonight we have intercepted an effect, an attempt upon the mask. But the cause, the true intelligence behind these clumsy hands, remains at liberty. Until I grasp that thread, the matter cannot be considered solved." I pressed him for his meaning, but he merely sank back into the cab and lapsed into one of those silences which I had learned were best left undisturbed. When we arrived at Baker Street, he busied himself at once with the small box containing the mask. He handled it as though it were less a treasure than a problem set before him in cipher. He held it beneath the lamplight, examined the surface with his lens, tapped lightly at the inner rim, and once or twice uttered a low exclamation. I could make little of his actions, though I noticed that his expression gradually sharpened from abstraction into resolve. Later that morning, Lestrade arrived, brimming with official satisfaction. He reported that the men taken at the museum, 3 in number, had proved uncooperative under questioning, their story a tissue of half-truths and evasions. Yet one fact had emerged. They were all known associates of a certain Julius Markham, a dealer in antiquities whose reputation was tainted by whispers of smuggling and fraud. Markham, however, had gone to ground. His premises in Bloomsbury were shuttered, and none of his clerks could give an account of his movements. At the mention of the name, Holmes's eyes gleamed with the light of recognition. "Markham," he said softly. "Yes, I have crossed his path before, though never with proof sufficient to bring him to account. Such odour ought not to hang so freshly in the air. Someone carried it in upon their garments." Fairfax looked bewildered. "But, Mr. Holmes, all our wrappings are sealed." "Precisely," Holmes replied, "which suggests that the individual we pursue has laboured closely with such antiquities, perhaps in Egypt itself, perhaps here in London. Either way, the trail begins to emerge. We shall not trouble further tonight. Let the hall be secured. Watson, tomorrow our task lies with the dead attendant. From the silence of his room we may coax a voice." And with that, Holmes turned on his heel, his expression more animated than I had seen in weeks. It was evident to me that whatever shadow of gloom the fog cast over London, it had failed to dim the fierce light of his reason. As we departed the museum, I could not help but reflect upon the strange mingling of the modern and the ancient, of gas lamps and pharaohs, of London fog and desert curses. Yet in the centre of that web stood Sherlock Holmes, calm, inexorable, and ready to rend apart whatever veil of mystery concealed the truth. The fog had scarcely lifted when Holmes roused me from my slumber with a peremptory knock upon my door. He stood already dressed, his eyes alight with that peculiar brilliance which always heralded the scent of discovery. "Come, Watson," said he briskly. "There is no time for indolence. The morning promises revelations, and I should not like to keep them waiting." Within the quarter hour we were seated in a hansom bound for the lodgings of the unfortunate attendant Collins, Situated in a modest street off Bloomsbury, the day was cold and grey, the mist lying low among the chimneys, but Holmes seemed unaffected by the damp air. He sat forward, his long hands clasped, his gaze abstracted, yet from time to time a faint smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. I had seen the expression before. It was the look of a man who had already glimpsed the outline of truth and required only a few strokes more to render the picture complete. Collins had occupied a set of rooms on the second floor of a narrow, respectable house whose door was answered by a landlady of ample figure and querulous manner. She admitted us readily upon learning our errand, for Sir Edmund had sent word that Holmes would be conducting an inquiry. The air of the stairwell was close, and I noted the faint odour of camphor and dust that clung to places inhabited by bachelors of frugal habit. The chamber itself was a small one, plainly furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a writing desk pushed against the window. A fire smouldered weakly in the grate, though it had clearly been set by the landlady that morning, rather than by its late occupant. Collins lay upon the bed still, his features stiffened in that ghastly mask of horror which Sir Edmund had described. The coroner had departed after his examination, leaving the body undisturbed until arrangements could be made. Holmes advanced at once, his keen gaze roving over the room in swift succession, from the papers upon the desk, to the boots beneath the chair, to the bed itself where the man's hands were clenched tight upon the coverlet. He bent low, bringing his lens to bear upon the blue-tinged lips and the stark lines frozen across the face. Then he touched the rigid fingers gently, as if to test their grasp, before straightening with a thoughtful air. "Heart failure, they say," Holmes murmured. "Yes, the heart has failed indeed, but not from natural infirmity. There is a certain rigidity here, Watson, which I find most suggestive. Mark the position of the eyes, staring not upward in agony, but sideways, as though the last vision fixed upon some presence in the room." I followed his glance to the shadowed corner beside the desk. The plain wallpaper revealed nothing, yet I confess I felt a chill, as though some phantom still lingered where the dead man's gaze remained fixed. Holmes moved to the washstand, where a glass and a small brown vial stood. He uncorked the latter, sniffed its contents, and gave a slight nod. "A tincture of valerian." Collins suffered nerves, perhaps sleeplessness. "That explains little. But this is more telling." He indicated the glass, where a faint sediment clung to the bottom. With his pocket-knife he scraped a trace and brought it beneath his lens. Her crystalline residue, most curious. Not of valerian, certainly. "Watson, we must have this tested at Bart's. It may well tell us what stopped that poor heart in its beating." While he spoke, he turned to the desk and examined its contents. There lay a scattering of notes in a cramped hand, chiefly catalogue entries of artifacts and translations of hieroglyphics. Among them, however, Holmes drew forth a folded paper, the edges smudged as if with haste. He opened it carefully, and together we read the few words scrawled within. "It watches, it knows. I shall not go again to the hall. The mask is alive." I felt an involuntary thrill at the dreadful suggestion, though Holmes merely raised an eyebrow. "A mind unsettled by superstition," said he. "Yet why should Collins, after 10 years of steady service, suddenly yield to fancies of this nature?" "It is significant, Watson. Significant in its timing." We continued our search. In a drawer, Holmes discovered a pair of gloves stained with a faint resinous substance. He held them to his nose. The same cedar odor we detected at the museum. And yet Collins was no thief. If he handled the mask last evening, it may have left this trace. But why should the scent be fresh upon his gloves, while others who touched the relic in the past left no such mark? I think, my dear fellow, that some preparation has lately been applied to the mask itself. At that instant, a knock sounded at the door, and the landlady reappeared, announcing that Inspector Lestrade had arrived. In strode our old acquaintance, brisk and businesslike as ever, his sharp features betraying a mixture of relief and annoyance at finding Holmes already engaged upon the case. "So, here we are again, Mr. Holmes," said he, glancing toward the body. "A bad business, but straightforward enough. Man dies of fright after bungling his watch. Fancy tales of curses won't serve us. The thief slipped in with a false key, took the mask, and poor Collins, weak-hearted fellow, worked himself into a fit. That's all there is to it." Holmes smiled thinly. "And yet you are here, Lestrade, rather than back in your warm office. You suspect there may be more beneath the surface. Lestrade shifted uneasily. Well, there are peculiarities, but I'll have my men scouring the pawnshops and riverfront before the day is out. Mark me, the mask will turn up. Indeed, said Holmes with a shrug. You will do your duty in your way and I in mine. I would advise, however, that you instruct your men not to handle the relic when found without proper care. There is something unusual in its condition, something which touched Collins before his death. The inspector looked skeptical, but Holmes had already turned back to the desk. He tapped the paper with its eerie message. Tell me, Lestrade, had you seen this? No, said the inspector, frowning. What do you make of it? Only this, Holmes replied softly, that Collins knew more than he dared to tell. He was afraid of a watcher. Whether that watcher was of flesh and blood, or born of his imagination, we must determine. But men rarely die of dreams alone. We quitted the lodgings shortly after, leaving Lestrade to his routine inquiries. As the cab bore us back through the damp streets, Holmes sat silent, the slip of paper held between his fingers. The rattle of wheels mingled with the distant tolling of St. Paul's, and I felt as though London itself were shrouded not merely in fog, but in some ancient mystery drawn across centuries. At length Holmes spoke, more to himself than to me. The key, the cedar oil, the gloves, the residue in the glass, each is a thread. Draw them together, Watson, and we may yet lift the mask not of the Pharaoh but of the living man who hides behind this veil of terror. Tonight we follow superstition. Tomorrow reason shall lay it bare. The afternoon found us at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where Holmes had secured the services of an analytical chemist with whom he shared a mutual esteem. The gentleman, a quiet scholar named Dr. Meredith, received the small scrapings from Collins' glass with evident curiosity. We watched as he set about the business of dissolution, filtration, and application of various reagents. His brow furrowed in concentration, while the tiny quantities of residue yielded their secrets drop by drop. Holmes stood over him with the eager impatience of a hound upon the leash, while I confess my own understanding of the delicate processes was scant, and my thoughts returned persistently to the terror carved upon Collins's lifeless face. At last the chemist straightened, holding a narrow strip of test paper, now stained a vivid hue. There can be no doubt, said he gravely. The substance is digitalin, an extract of the foxglove plant. It is a potent cardiac poison, insidious in its action, and in small doses nearly undetectable save by careful analysis. Holmes accepted this pronouncement with a curt nod. Digitalin indeed. Then our unfortunate attendant did not succumb to fright alone, but to a draught cunningly laced with death. The hand that offered him the glass meant for him never to speak of what he knew. Come, Watson, the web tightens. We left the hospital and returned to Baker Street, where Holmes, after a brief interval of pipe and meditation, threw himself once more into action. He spread upon the table the gloves bearing traces of cedar, the ominous note scrawled by Collins, and my own hurried transcription of Dr. Meredith's findings. Consider, Watson, said he, pacing before the fire, the conjunction of elements. Collins handles the mask and discovers something amiss, something sufficient to strike fear into his mind. He resolves to say no more, yet even silence cannot save him. He is given a drink which carries death in its depths. Who then had both the opportunity to administer such a draught and the knowledge that Collins's silence was perilous? I reflected. One of his colleagues at the museum, perhaps. The curator or even the director himself. Holmes's eyes gleamed. An excellent surmise, my dear fellow. And yet remember, the lock was opened with a key, not forced. That narrows our circle still further. Let us then return this night to the Egyptian Hall. I have a mind to test whether our mysterious intruder left any trace which daylight concealed. Thus it was that, under cover of darkness, we once more approached the British Museum. Sir Edmund himself admitted us, his expression betraying anxiety. I have not closed my eyes since your visit, Mr. Holmes, he confessed. The staff are in mutiny, declaring the curse has claimed its victim and will claim more. Then it is the more urgent that we dispel these fancies, Holmes replied curtly. Have no fear, Sir Edmund. Tonight may yield us the truth. The Egyptian Hall lay in solemn silence, the massive forms of its statues looming like sentinels in the dim glow of our lanterns. Holmes moved swiftly, examining once more the case and its surroundings, then signaling us to extinguish the light. Wait, he whispered and crouched in the shadows. I followed suit. though my heart beat rather faster than I should like to admit. For some minutes nothing disturbed the silence, save the muffled drip of rain beyond the windows. Then, faint but distinct, came the echo of a footfall along the distant corridor. It was cautious, deliberate, as of one who treads with care not to be overheard. Nearer it came, until a figure glided into view, a tall man wrapped in a dark cloak, his head covered by a hood. He paused before the empty case, and for a moment raised something in his hand to the light. Even at that distance I caught the gleam of gold. Sir Edmund gasped audibly, but Holmes's hand closed firmly upon his arm. "Not yet," he breathed. The intruder placed the object upon the stand within the case, the mask itself, shining eerily in the lantern glow. He stood motionless, gazing upon it with an intensity that bordered upon reverence before turning to withdraw. In that instant, Holmes sprang forward with astonishing swiftness, seizing the man by the shoulder. The cloak fell back, revealing a swarthy face, sharp-featured, the eyes flashing with defiance. "Ah," cried Holmes, "so the custodian returns what he dared not keep. Watson, Sir Edmund, assist me!" We rushed to Holmes's aid, and after a brief struggle the man was secured. He glared at us, his breath coming fast. "You do not understand," he said hoarsely. "The mask is not yours to keep. It belongs to Egypt, and Egypt will curse all who defile it." Holmes regarded him coldly. "Your sentiments do you credit, sir, but your methods betray you. You are no mere patriot reclaiming a relic. You are a murderer, and your words shall not cleanse your hands." The man spat an oath in a foreign tongue, but made no further resistance. Holmes, however, did not summon the constables at once. Instead, he bent over the mask, examining its surface minutely by the beam of his lantern. After a few moments he straightened, satisfaction in his eyes. "As I suspected. Watson, do you perceive the fine film upon the interior surface?" I leaned close and observed a faint oily sheen clinging to the golden contours. "Yes, though I should not have noticed it without direction. It is a preparation," Holmes explained. "A resin mingled with a narcotic, intended to produce dread hallucinations in any who handled the relic. Our poor Collins touched the mask, experienced its strange effect, and in his terror became a danger to those who plotted this theft. Hence the poisoned draught." Sir Edmund uttered an exclamation of horror, but Holmes only shrugged. "Superstition has ever been the ally of the criminal, my dear sir. What more effective shield than the dread of a Pharaoh's curse?" The prisoner laughed harshly. "You speak of superstition, but you know nothing of our cause. Men such as Collins are pawns, unfit to touch what should rest forever in the Valley of Kings." Holmes silenced him with a gesture. "Your motives will be weighed in their proper place. For now you will accompany us. Watson, let us escort this gentleman to Scotland Yard, where Lestrade may amuse himself with the formalities." As we emerged once more into the fog-laden night, I could not help but marvel at the strangeness of the scene we had witnessed. The mask of a pharaoh shimmering in the gaslight, the clash of ancient reverence and modern crime, and at the center of it all the unyielding figure of Holmes, who had pierced the veil of superstition to reveal the cold hand of reason beneath. Yet I sensed from the thoughtful set of his features that the case was not yet fully concluded, and that deeper mysteries still awaited us in the days to come. The hansom rattled through the midnight streets, our captive sullen between Holmes and myself, his wrists secured by Holmes's handkerchief, knotted with a deftness that would have done credit to any jailer. Sir Edmund rode opposite, pale and shaken, the gleam of the returned mask half wrapped in cloth upon his knees. The prisoner's eyes, though downcast, burned with a strange fervour that spoke of more than mere criminality. It was the gaze of a zealot, one who believed himself the agent of some higher power. At Scotland Yard, Lestrade received us with mingled triumph and irritation, for though the capture brought him professional credit, the manner of it bore unmistakably the stamp of Holmes's genius. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said he, rubbing his hands together, "you've delivered me the fox, and I shall see that he runs no more." "Who is he?" Holmes fixed the prisoner with his keen gaze. "His name we shall presently learn. His profession I can already tell you. He is an antiquities dealer, or at the very least a man long familiar with them. Observe his fingers, stained by contact with bronze and stone dust, and note the faint tattoo upon his wrist, an Egyptian cartouche. He has worked in Cairo, perhaps at Luxor, and belongs to a fraternity that deems itself custodian of its nation's treasures. Is it not so?" The man's lips curved in a contemptuous smile, but he said nothing. "Very well," continued Holmes. "If you will not assist us, the matter is still plain. You returned the mask because you found it unsaleable. You poisoned Collins because he alone suspected the trick of the resin you had applied to the relic, and in his terror, he might have betrayed you. The cedar oil, mingled with narcotic, would induce in the susceptible a sense of dread, feeding the legend of a curse. It was a ruse to deter pursuit. But Collins, poor fellow, perceived enough to rattle your plans, and for that he was silenced." Lestrade gave a satisfied grunt. "Murder and theft both, eh? That'll serve. We'll find his name among the foreign registers." Yet Holmes shook his head. "There is more here, Lestrade, than the theft of a single relic. This man is no solitary marauder. He is but the hand of a larger body, one that has agents even here in London. I fear Collins stumbled upon a scheme whose reach goes far beyond this hall and this mask." At that, the prisoner's eyes flickered, and Holmes, ever watchful, seized upon the tell. "Ah, you betray yourself. There is indeed more at stake, but rest assured, we shall discover it without your confession." Lestrade dismissed the man into custody, and we returned with Sir Edmund to Baker Street, the hour verging on dawn. The mask, now securely boxed, sat upon the table between us, gleaming with an otherworldly lustre in the lamplight. Holmes examined it minutely with his lens, running a thin scalpel along the inner curve to collect a trace of the resinous film. "See here, Watson," said he, showing me the minute scrapings. "This is a compound of cedar oil, resin, and a tincture of datura, a substance known to induce fearful hallucinations. A touch upon the skin is enough to bring the fancy of shapes, sounds, and presences unseen. To men already primed with tales of curses, the effect would be devastating. Collins, being of nervous temperament, was especially vulnerable." Sir Edmund groaned. "And yet, Mr. Holmes, what fiendish cunning! To turn superstition itself into a weapon." Holmes replaced the mask with care. "It is ever the way of cunning minds, Sir Edmund, but the motive remains imperfectly explained. Our prisoner, if he is what I suspect, did not intend merely to steal, but to discredit your institution. By spreading terror among your staff, by removing a treasure and then returning it under cover of night, he casts upon the museum the shadow of incompetence and invites those abroad to demand restitution of their heritage. In short, it is a crime with a political colouring." The trustee sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "The museum's reputation is already imperilled. If this affair becomes public," Holmes interrupted him sharply, "then we must forestall it. And that brings us to our next step. The man we apprehended will not speak, but his associates will. Somewhere in London he has confederates, men who received the mask, prepared it, and directed its return. We must draw them into the open." He rose suddenly, pacing the room, his lean form restless with energy. "Yes, it is clear now. The mask is bait. They sought to use it against you, Sir Edmund, but we shall turn it against them. With your permission, I shall arrange for news to leak that the relic has been restored to its case. If our adversaries believe their scheme unfinished, they will attempt again, and this time we shall be waiting." It was upon a dreary November evening, when the fog hung so thick over the city that the glow of the gas lamps seemed little more than blurred halos in the gloom, that I found myself once again in our familiar quarters at Baker Street. Holmes had passed most of the day in his habitual silence, stretched upon the sofa with his long limbs drawn together, his piercing eyes half closed in that curious state which lay midway between idleness and intense mental activity. The clatter of hooves and wheels from the street below penetrated faintly through the muffled windows, but my companion remained motionless, his sharp features lost in shadow. I had just set aside a medical journal when there came a violent knocking at the door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a gentleman of middle age, his complexion pale, his hands trembling as he removed his hat. There was about him an air of authority tempered by nervous agitation, which immediately marked him as a man burdened by some grave concern. "My name is Sir Edmund Fairfax," he announced, his voice wavering slightly. "I am a trustee of the British Museum, and I come to you, Mr. Holmes, in what may be described as our hour of utmost desperation." Holmes inclined his head politely, motioning our visitor to the armchair near the fire. "So you have chosen your hour well, Sir Edmund," said he, his tone brisk but not unkind. "The fog without will discourage idle callers. Pray compose yourself and state your business plainly." I take it some occurrence of irregular nature has transpired within the walls of your institution? Sir Edmund drew a hand across his brow. More than irregular, sir. It is nothing less than catastrophic. Last night, under circumstances I cannot yet fully explain, a priceless relic, the funerary mask of Pharaoh Menkora, was removed from its display case in our Egyptian hall. The mask is of extraordinary antiquity, fashioned in gold and lapis, and insured for a sum that beggars belief. Its theft has shaken the very foundations of the museum's reputation. Holmes opened his eyes fully now, the grey irises gleaming in the firelight. "And Scotland Yard?" he asked. "They are, of course, involved," Sir Edmund replied. "Inspector Lestrade himself examined the hall this morning. Yet he declares it a common burglary. I assure you, Mr. Holmes, nothing about this affair is common. There were no signs of forced entry, and the watchmen, both of them veterans of the army, swear they saw no intruder. And yet the mask is gone." Holmes steepled his fingers, the faintest trace of a smile playing about his lips, an object vanishing without intrusion, before the very eyes of two trained guards. "Truly, Watson, we are promised an entertainment tonight." But Sir Edmund had not finished. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper as though the fog itself might carry his words away. "There is something further, Mr. Holmes. This morning one of the attendants who handled the relic was discovered in his lodgings, dead. The coroner speaks of heart failure, but the poor man's features were contorted in a ghastly expression of terror, as though he had looked upon the very face of doom. Among the staff, whispers abound of an ancient curse, one said to strike down any who dare to disturb the Pharaoh's mask." Holmes's expression hardened, the gleam of interest replaced by one of determination. He rose swiftly, reaching for his coat and hat. "Curses, Sir Edmund, are the refuge of idle superstition, but men do die of fear, and priceless treasures do vanish at the hands of mortals. Come, Watson, we must not allow the fog to precede us. Tonight we go to the British Museum." The cab carried us swiftly through the fog-choked streets, its lamps throwing pale cones of light upon the streaming mist. Holmes leaned forward with that particular energy which marked him whenever the scent of a true puzzle had reached his nostrils. His thin fingers drummed upon the window frame, while his gaze, though directed outward, seemed to pierce beyond the darkened facades into some invisible realm where the threads of reason were already intertwining. I, for my part, could not suppress a shiver, whether from the chill air that crept through the seams of the carriage, or from the sombre weight of Sir Edmund's tale. The thought of an ancient mask disappearing as if spirited away, followed by a sudden death clothed in terror, stirred the imagination in ways most unwelcome. We drew up at last before the great portico of the British Museum, whose columns rose like spectral sentinels in the fog. Sir Edmund ushered us within, his agitation manifest in his hurried stride and frequent glances over his shoulder. The vast interior, usually echoing with the measured tread of visitors, lay silent but for the faint reverberation of our footsteps. Gaslight burned in scattered lamps along the corridors, throwing grotesque shadows upon the marble busts and sarcophagi that lined the way. More than once I fancied that the carved eyes of some ancient figure watched our progress with an expression neither wholly lifeless nor benign. Holmes walked with calm assurance, his gaze darting from wall to floor, from ceiling to door hinge, as though no detail, however minute, might elude his inspection. We passed beneath an archway and entered the Egyptian hall, a long chamber flanked with colossal statues of deities, whose inscrutable features were dimly revealed by the sputtering lamps. At the far end stood a glass case, its front panel ajar, the velvet-lined stand within bare. Around this emptiness clustered two uniformed constables, their faces betraying the unease of men asked to guard what was no longer present. "Here?" "Mr. Holmes," said Sir Edmund, his voice hushed though the hall was empty save for ourselves. "This case contained the mask. As you see, the glass is unbroken, the lock not forced. Yet when the morning light touched this hall, the relic was gone." Holmes advanced, bent low, and examined the case with the minuteness of a watchmaker. He touched the hinges, peered into the keyhole, then dropped to his knees to study the marble floor at the base. Producing his lens, he traced invisible lines that only his trained perception could discern. At length he rose, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "The case was opened with a key, Sir Edmund," said he. "Observe the faint scrape around the ward of the lock. An unpracticed hand might break a pick or leave rough scoring, but here the motion was smooth, deliberate, as of one acquainted with the proper tool. Sir Edmund gave a start. But only 3 keys exist, one in my own possession, one with the curator, and the third sealed in the director's safe. Holmes inclined his head. Nevertheless, the instrument that turned this lock was fashioned to its wards. Either the circle of trust has been breached, or another hand has duplicated the mechanism. We shall not speculate yet, but proceed. He moved with feline quickness to the surrounding statues, scanning their bases, and then along the floor, where a faint discoloration marred the otherwise polished surface. He produced his pocket rule, measured the breadth of the mark, and gave a soft chuckle. "Watson," said he, "what do you make of this?" I bent and beheld only a faint crescent, as though some substance had scuffed the stone. "A crack, perhaps," I ventured, "or the impression of a boot sole." Holmes's smile deepened. "A boot indeed, but not of the ordinary type worn by our constables or clerks. Note the sharply angled heel. Foreign manufacture, Egyptian or perhaps Levantine. Few London bootmakers would trouble with such design. Already we perceive a visitor of uncommon origin." While I marvelled at his quick discernment, one of the constables approached hesitantly. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen, but this here hall was locked fast from without all night." I checked the doors myself. No one passed. Holmes regarded him with interest. "And yet, my good fellow, someone most certainly did. Unless, of course, we are to believe that Pharaoh Menkora himself walked abroad to reclaim his ornament." The constable flushed and muttered something about curses, but Holmes waved him off. "We are men of reason, not of phantoms. Tell me, Sir Edmund, of this attendant whose death has spread alarm. Was he of long service?" "His name was Collins," Fairfax replied gravely. "He had been in our employ nearly a decade, chiefly handling Egyptian artifacts. Last evening he was among the last to depart the hall, charged with verifying that the mask was secure. This morning, as I have told you, he was found lifeless, the physicians declaring his heart had failed." "But," he hesitated, "the look upon his face was frightful, Mr. Holmes. It has inflamed the talk of curses." Holmes tapped the glass case thoughtfully. "Fear may strike down a weak heart, Sir Edmund, yet fear is not born of air but of cause. We must learn what it was that Collins beheld in his final hours. Watson, you and I shall visit his lodgings at first light. In the meantime, Sir Edmund, I would have a list of all who possessed keys, all who had access to this hall last night, and the record of any visitor admitted after dusk." "I shall prepare it at once," said Fairfax. Holmes turned suddenly and strode the length of the hall, halting at a high window where the fog pressed against the glass in shifting waves. He examined the sill, the latch, even the minute scratches in the wood. At one point he leaned far out into the night air, his lean form silhouetted against the mist. Then he returned, brushing dust from his hands. "No ingress here," he murmured. "The thief relied upon secrecy, not force." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "And yet there is an odor lingering, faint but distinct. Watson, do you detect it?" I sniffed, but perceived nothing save the must of stone and old wood. "I cannot say that I do. Indeed, it is the scent of cedar oil, most commonly used to preserve linen wrappings about mummies.